What's up everyone, welcome back to my unit series for Genshin Impact. Today we're going to be discussing Tartaglia, aka Childe. First, I just want to say thank you so much for all the love and support. Once we hit the 1,000 subscriber milestone, I will be doing a giveaway as a part of my way of saying thank you to this amazing community. It's a great time to subscribe too, since I am planning on making more content around units, team builds, and other game news for Genshin Impact. In my Diana Kit Explained video, you asked for me to tackle Childe, so here we are. We're going to discuss stats, weapons, artifacts, and teams to pair him up with, so let's go ahead and get started. To start, let's go ahead and talk about the elemental reactions, specifically Vaporize. When a unit is applied with Wet or Pyro, the opposing triggering element will proc multiplicative elemental damage. Because of this, units that are built on Hydro elemental damage and have high damage scaling with critical hits can maximize this effect to deal extra thick damage. You'll see videos that showcase this, and I'll discuss this build as a team comp, but I will note that the real MVPs in a setup like this are around Bennett and Sucrose. To understand Childe, we first need to understand Riptide, or what I like to call the Hydro virus. When using Childe's aim shot, he applies this effect on an enemy. He also has a passive that allows this to occur, and I'll go ahead and cover that next. Opponents affected by Riptide suffer AoE Hydro damage effects when attacked by Childe in various ways. Damage dealt in these ways are counted as normal attack damage, and it lasts 10 seconds initially. Riptide Flash can happen if you do an aim shot while the opponent already has Riptide, which causes a multi-hit AoE to deal additional damage every 0.7 seconds. Riptide Burst happens when you're defeating an enemy affected by Riptide already, creates a Hydro Burst effect that inflicts the Riptide status on nearby opponents' hit, like a virus. The other aspect to Childe, and notably the most confusing part, is due to him being completely different than any other unit in the game because he can change stances, from range to melee. This is known as Foul Legacy Raging Tide, which is his skill where he burst AoE's Hydro damage onto his nearby foes, making them wet, and then starts dual blading like an assassin. This is when shit gets real. All of his damage is Hydro damage, but with Riptide in effect, it procs another Riptide skill called Riptide Slash, which when hitting a Riptide-affected enemy with one of these melee attacks deals AoE Hydro damage. This is considered elemental skill damage, and occurs every 1.5 seconds. We'll get into how powerful this skill can become with one of Childe's passive unlocks. Now, the melee stance can only be done in a period of up to 30 seconds at a time. You can either choose to come out of it early and have a quicker cooldown, or if you use it all the way through, it'll force you out with a longer cooldown of 45 seconds. Now, the minimum cooldown on this is 6 seconds, so do keep that in mind. Now let's talk about Childe's talents. We're going to start with his passives first. We have Master of Weaponry, which having him in your team boosts everyone's normal attack skill by 1, increasing damage between 10 to 15% on each part of your party, which is pretty incredible by itself. Then we have Never Ending, which extends Riptide duration by 8 seconds up to a total of 18 seconds. And then we have his 4-star ability, Sword of Talents, which in my opinion breaks Childe. When Childe goes into his melee stance and he crits, it will apply the Riptide status on the enemies that he hits. Since he's constantly doing AoE Hydro damage and the goal of his kit is to crit, once his kit is maximized, he'll be dropping water bombs all over the field. Oh, and before I forget, other units can be swapped too, so if you kill the enemy within the 18 seconds of Riptide, it's still going to proc Riptide Burst even if Childe is not on the field. So if you really wanted to, you could just use him to start a Riptide and come in with a crowd control like Venti, and then a DPS like Fischl and then Razor to create an electro-charged Purple Rain. Normal attack is mostly covered. You won't really be doing them with Childe unless you're in the melee stance, since it converts everything to Hydro, and then it can proc Riptide once he's at 4-star. Now let's talk about Burst, Havoc Obliteration. Now there are 2 ways you can do this. Ranged, you do an AoE Hydro effect that applies Riptide and returns 20 of the 60 energy cost back to Childe. Scaling starts at 378% for this attack. Or you can switch into your melee stance, and this is where you start to see the really high damage numbers once it's leveled. He performs a large AoE, dealing massive Hydro damage to all surrounding opponents, which triggers a 4th Riptide effect, Riptide Blast, not Burst, which clears the effect of Riptide, but it triggers a Hydro Explosion that deals AoE Hydro damage in the form of elemental damage. So all of those boosts into Hydro, this is where they really see the benefit. So breaking this down, the key takeaways are that we know he does Hydro damage because it's his passive stat. We know that all of his noteworthy skills do Hydro damage. We also know that crit comes up frequently in his kit with the application of Riptide in his melee stance, and knowing that Hydro damage can also be influenced by crit hits, we should also look at critical damage. We also know that Hydro scaling is based on a percentage of his attack. His burst is what I consider the standard 60, not the shortest, not the longest. And finally, we know that Hydro causes the biggest elemental reaction multiplier in the game alongside Melt. The stat priority for Childe is that for his Sands, you're going to want attack percentage, his Goblet, Hydro damage percentage, and his Circlet, crit rate or crit damage. The minimum for crit rate should be 50% before crit damage is being considered, just for consistency purposes. There's stats that you're going to want to focus on if you can get them is, I would say, Elemental Mastery to have higher damage vaporizes, and recharge rate to have quicker burst rotations, which takes us into the artifact section. The first one I want to talk about is Gladiator's Finale and Noblesse Oblige, a 2-set and a 2-set. The reason we would be looking at this is to get the attack plus 18% and the elemental burst damage plus 20%. This is easy to obtain through the story and exploration and weeklies. The second set I want to talk about is Wanderer's Troop, which is a 4-set, Elemental Mastery plus 80 on the 2, and increased charged attack damage by 35% if you're using a bow, which boosts aim shot and the melee stance if you're using a charged attack. You'll prioritize charged melee attacks with this build. Elemental Mastery helps with the Vaporize effect. Another option that you can mess around with is Retracing Bolide, just because the meta is shifting towards shield units, and I know that we're getting quite a few of them, so I just want to throw that out there as well. You could put Retracing Bolide on him with an Archaic Petra on a Geo unit, which is one of the builds I'm going to bring up here in a few. Now let's go ahead and talk about weapons. We're going to discuss the preferred weapons in the world of money and luck, as well as the one for the miHoYo Heitsu edition. First one I want to talk about is Skyward Harp. This is like the best tier for him. It is a base rate of 45, it has crit rate as a substat, and a passive 20% crit damage boost. It also has a passive that helps with damage. It just makes the most sense. The second is going to be a weapon that's currently in the banner as well, and that is Rust, with a base attack of 42 and a substat of attack percentage. This increases your normal attack damage by 40%, and this actually converts into the melee stance, which is really nice. The third one I want to talk about is Viridescent Hunt. Now this is a battle pass weapon that has a base attack of 42, and it has crit rate as a substat, and actually the crit rate is higher than what the Skyward Harp currently has. The Cyclone passive can group enemies together, and it procs within the melee stance, which is also really nice with Riptide. A craftable option would be Prototype Crescent with a base attack of 42, the attack percentage substat, and the aim shot is more frequent to begin rotations, so it can help moving closer between ranged and melee. And for the 3-star options, we have Raven Bow, which has a base attack of 40, with Elemental Mastery, has a passive Hydro boost of 24% maximum, it's easy to refine to 5, and Elemental Mastery helps vaporize reaction damage. And then finally, this is kind of a last resort, but we have Slingshot at a base attack of 38 with a crit rate substat. The passive only works in ranged, which is why I say it's a last resort. If this is modified, it's a really great option. Now let's talk about teams that Childe fits into well. Now, I've seen a lot of content covering this, and you can do this in a lot of ways. You can either put units in that boost the rotation damage on a timer, or you can add units for resonance buffs and reactions. The most notable resonances for Childe, I would say, is Pyro with a 25% attack boost, and then Anemo for stamina for charged attack builds, movement speed, and his cooldown being 5% shorter. Helps relieve the longer timers if you choose to use the melee stance for long periods of time. I don't prefer this personally, but some do. And some other ones you can play around with is Electro, only using it with Electro-based teams, and I only mention that because that's what my primary team is, and he would act as a support DPS unit with Fischl. And then there's a Frozen build, but I only recommend this with a unit that shatters Frozen unit with Claymore, so I would say this would only really be good with Chongyun. Before I show you these builds, I'll just note that the teams I'm showing you are extremely underleveled and are unbuilt for me personally. I'm not a whale, so I don't have the resources to build these units right now, but just to display what the rotations look like. You'll need the right artifacts, pairings, and weapons to maximize the percentages, such as Viridescent Venerer and Thrilling Tales on Sucrose, and the highest damage output weapon on Bennett. Now first, you're always going to want to do Aim Shot to proc Riptide and Wet. Second, you're going to want to go through your Anemo unit to use the Skiller Burst for Swirl, with Viridescent Venerer to reduce the elemental resistance to water or Hydro and Anemo. Third, Bennett's going to use his burst, which increases attack percentage of the team within his circle by his base attack, which is his weapon plus his unit stat. Fourth, you're going to rotate your elemental reaction setup unit. So this is either going to be a Pyro unit or Bennett's going to be that unit. And then finally, Childe skills to melee stance to use his burst ability to cause the elemental reaction plus his scaling. Be careful not to skill too closely, or when you switch into his melee stance, his AoE burst will cause the reaction instead of your burst. This part actually frustrated me a lot, and if you watch a lot of videos on this, you'll see the character moves away from the enemy group really quick and then moves back into them. The reason they're doing that is so that they can proc into the E ability or skill and then use the Q ability or the burst. All right, so I'm going to give you a few different comps. I'm going to go through the rotation with them. The first one is Childe, Zhongling, Bennett, and Sucrose. You're going to have a double Pyro 25% attack buff. How this is going to start is Childe's going to do his aim shot to Riptide. Then you're going to go to Sucrose to do the burst or skill. Then you're going to go through Bennett, do his burst. And then you're going to go to Zhongling to use her burst or skill. And then you're going to switch to Childe to do a melee stance burst. The second team is going to be Childe, Bennett, Sucrose, and then main character as an Anemo, or you can use Venti or Jean. And for this rotation, you're going to start with Childe, aim shot, and Riptide. You're going to switch to Sucrose to do the burst or skill. You're going to do the MC burst to get them grouped together. And then you're going to do the Bennett burst and then Childe melee burst. You're going to use the main character burst to push away and group the enemies together, which allows you spacing to do Childe's melee stance switch safely. The verse fire builds that I would look at for this is using Childe, Barbara, Sucrose, and Bennett. Childe's going to use the aim shot and Riptide. You're going to use Barbara's skill, and then you're going to switch to Sucrose for the burst, then Bennett burst, and then go back to Childe for the melee burst. Barbara gives a Hydro bonus on Constellation, which most Venti owners have now with the freebies MiHoYo has given us. Now some playful builds that I'm currently testing is Razor, Childe, Fischl, and Venti for a double Electro team. I like this one personally, but it is missing Superconduct, which Razor does really well with. And the way that I rotate through this is I use Childe's aim shot or Riptide, Venti burst, then the Fischl burst or skill to throw Oz out there, switch back to Childe for a melee burst, which will proc Electro charge, and then I'm going to use his skill until cooldown. So it's basically just, again, Purple Rain. Once he's on a cooldown, I tried to come out of it, so it's only 36 seconds, and then I switch to Razor and use Razor's skill and then his burst, which Razor's burst is usually a pretty long period of time, which will help reduce Childe's rotation before I'll need it again. And then I'm using a shield build test right now for Childe with main character using Archaic Petra, Bennett, and Sucrose. There isn't a buff from the team synergy, but the way that this would work is main character would use their skill, Childe uses his aim shot to cause Riptide and also form a Hydro Crystallize, and then Sucrose burst, and then Bennett burst, and then Childe melee burst. Once the Hydro Crystallize is formed, you're fine. With this build though, you can also play around with Childe using Retracing Bolide. It won't benefit his burst, but it will increase his normal and charged attack output while under the effects of the shield. And if you want to try out other teams, you don't need to use Sucrose and Bennett, but they are optimal because of their party boost to attack percentage and elemental mastery, something that Childe benefits from very heavily. It's okay to remove damage output though for utility. I enjoy my main comp over these high damage output comps, mainly because I already have them built and I don't have either of these constellations built at all. You manage to get Bennett to C2 and Sucrose to C6, you'll have an insane elemental reaction group. If you want to understand the why behind these two units, feel free to check out my other guides on units. I will continue to expand on units as I learn more about them. You can also mess around with other Pyro or Anemo units if you have them, but I wanted to focus this on what people are more likely to have for the sake of this video. So to recap, Childe is easily the most complicated unit currently in the game, and I hope that this guide helped you understand how to use him better. Even I had to watch others and pick apart the rotations to understand them fully to figure out the build that works optimally. He's an insane Hydro DPS alongside the Hydro Queen Mona, and they can output damage numbers with reactions at an insane amount based on their scaling to Hydro damage. If built correctly, Childe can do insane damage and be a fun unit to play with. I hope you found this guide helpful and consider supporting with a like. If this helped you out, consider subscribing since I am planning on more content around Genshin Impact, and comment below if you have any questions. I'd love to engage in the comments and help in any way. I hope that you have the best luck with your summons and that you continue to enjoy this wonderful game, and I will see you in the next one.